But what if it became more commonplace? What if we opened ourselves up more to that? And we're willing to see that there's a difference between criticism and feedback.
That's key. Can you expand on that?
Of course. If someone is being judgmental and criticizing you over something that you cannot change, right? It is just part of who you are. Then that's different than making an observation of something that absolutely could be in some way pivoted. Like if you're building out a program or you're creating an artwork. Artwork is subjective, and so that's somewhat part of who you are and may not desire to be changed. But there are certain things that we do that if we seek feedback on it, or there is an awareness that feedback can be provided to enhance it, then it's not a personal hit. It is about building something that is outside of self, that is intended to be for the greater whole, that is intended to incorporate others into it. So it is not about self, it is intended to be about others. And so the moment you're creating something that you know will include others, then you by default have to include others in the feedback process and be willing to expand it out. Where if it's like my personal clothing, yeah, I might even take a little bit of feedback on that. But if I know my style and I like my style and someone is criticizing the clothing I wear, I might just go, okay, well, that's your viewpoint.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to have you demean me and judge me for it. So there is a fine line, but we have to be willing to say, okay, if I'm building a project or a program or something that will affect you, and I plan to bring it out to you, then I have to be open to your viewpoint of it and see how I can make it more inclusive.
I like that. So criticism kind of has that more of like maybe a negative energy or a lower vibration energy, where like feedback is more of a positive, uplifting energy. Could it be presented in that way, or is that a little bit too black and white?
I think that's maybe a little bit too black and white, because some individuals may feel like feedback is a lower energy.
Interesting.
What we have to be able to do is separate feedback from self. Because feedback is about something that we're creating outside of self. Even if a little bit of our self is in it, it's still something separate from self would be what I would offer. So like as much as we love this community that we're building and as much as we love Suivera, it is not about us.
No.
It is about the movement. Therefore, it has to be open to feedback from the community that is building it. Likewise, if we are developing something for the business that we have outside of Suivera, it is still about the company, and we have to be open to feedback about the company. It is, as much as we have invested ourselves in it, it is still about the company, not about who I am. I am not the company is not me. Therefore, if somebody's giving me feedback on that company, it is not a personal slight.
Right.
All too often, we take it as a personal slight because we've invested so much of ourselves in it. And therefore, our ego gets wrapped up in it, and we don't want to take feedback. It is as though you have just hurt me because you've criticized the work that I do, is how we feel. But it's not that at all. It is, I am providing feedback on this process. I am grateful that someone cares enough about the business I am creating to provide me feedback to make my company, my business, and my skill set better. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I was in some ways attempting to get clarity on just like some of the reasons why we use direct instead of control, for example, because there's oftentimes you hear, well, you need to take constructive criticism. And that sounds kind of like opposite things.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm attempting to almost say, okay, well, how do we define that? How do we better understand? Because do we need constructive criticism if we just say, hey, feedback?
Yeah.
Is it, at some level, are we unintentionally using the same kind of words, but actually not recognizing the what it has behind it, like the energy behind it, like if just swapping out words, for example, like direct and control. Direct again is a very positive. Control tends to be a very negative. And even when we say, "Oh yeah, I want to be in control of myself," okay, fine. In some ways, that can be viewed as positive, but the majority, how often is control used positively?
Yeah.
Not very often. And so when you can say I direct myself, right? It's like, okay, yeah, when it's used, direction is usually in a positive note, or at least let's call it neutral.
Yeah.
Like I need directions to somewhere, or maybe I'm directing a movie, or any way that we use it, it tends to be less of a negative connotation or usage in that sense. And so I was just kind of seeking to understand, for those who really desire to be focused on the way that they communicate, not only to others but to themselves, this understanding of constructive criticism, which I hear constantly.
I do too. Yeah.
And it's always like, oh, well, you need to learn constructive criticism. I heard that all the time growing up, and I get that, and I appreciate it. But it was hard. It was always hard to swallow that compared to like, hey, do you want some feedback?
Yeah.
And that, like, I don't know. It just felt better coming from that standpoint, or like, hey, I've got some feedback from you or for you, like if you're willing to hear it. Like, there's just obviously both entail room for improvement, which is important. But there was just something a little bit extra, like constructive criticism almost like came from just like, it almost felt a little bit disconnected from the heart. It would be like, okay, here's logic, here's, that approach, without really fully seeing the other person at all levels. Where I think feedback just has that extra level of like, hey, it's got some heart. It can definitely have some logic, because feedback needs to have logic.
Yeah.
But it has that extra little bit heart in there that's like, look, I see you and I see what you're attempting to do and I see the potential. And here's some information to help you get there.
Yeah. I agree, because I don't understand how criticism can ever be constructive, which is why I never understood that term.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because you immediately, when you said criticism, it was immediately paired with judgment.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
It was indeed.
It was indeed, as most things are with you. But yeah, I mean, even that, I guess I had that moment of reflection as you were talking about. I was like, oh yeah, criticism and judgment definitely tend to be paired.
Yeah.
Like, you don't hear judgment and feedback paired very often. Mm-hmm. So that's why they're in different spaces.
Yeah. Yes. And it's hard to be grateful for any kind of criticism, whether it's constructive or otherwise. Now, can you be? Yeah, of course. You can give gratitude for anything, even if it's just, okay, I'm grateful that I understand where that is coming from. Because everyone is in their own space. And if someone is giving me constructive criticism, I have a choice of whether I accept it or not. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so generally, constructive criticism comes from, okay, I'll go back to the outfit, because, sometimes as people, we love to provide such things. And so if someone's giving me constructive criticism about my attire, okay, I appreciate it. I can receive it or not receive it, but it allows me to understand what they prefer. Because ultimately, what they're doing is telling me what their style is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helps me understand, okay, if I were to ever get a gift for them and it included clothing, then I know what their style would be. And therefore I can use it for that. Doesn't mean that I have to take it on as my own. It means that they just provided me a beautiful opportunity to know where they are and how I can use that in the future to be in best service to them.
I like it.
So we all get an opportunity to say, all right, what am I going to do with this right now? Am I going to be triggered by it? Am I going to allow my ego to get in the way? Or am I going to remain balanced in my ego and find some way to find gifts in this?